Hi guys, Tom Anderson, 100 Days of Thankfulness. Today is day 33 and we're talking about the importance of withholding judgment. And also I want to talk about why I'm so thankful for Dr. Stephen Covey, who is the author of The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So when I talk about withholding judgment, I'm actually not saying that we should never judge. Actually, to do so is impossible. In fact, the moment you say you should never judge anyone, you're making a judgment. So, some people might criticize, people like me who believe in the Bible to make a statement that it's okay to actually make judgments when in the Bible it says you shouldn't. And I'm going to explain that here. Matthew 7:1 is the verse that is often cited for that. And the problem is that a lot of times people will take verses out of the Bible and pull them out of context, and they use that to reinforce their own belief system. The problem with doing that, of pulling things out of context, is often you arrive at the wrong conclusion simply because you haven't read a little bit further to understand, how it's being surrounded. And this particular verse in Matthew 7:1 that says, "Do not judge so that you will not be judged," it actually goes on to describe a judgment that Jesus is doing here. It says, "For in the way you judge, you will be judged, and by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' and behold, the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." So really what he's saying there is we need to be really careful about judging other people when we ourselves are, at fault. So it's, if we're going to put any time and energy into judgment, it's first and foremost what we should be doing is looking in the mirror. And I've mentioned that before. The other thing that you note is, in this case, a lot of the judgment or the judging that's going on in these conversations that Jesus is having is with regard to the Pharisees. Now, the Pharisees always presented themselves as being the righteous, good people that were always obeying the laws of Moses, and they were often contrasting themselves with or comparing themselves with the sinners who were not following the laws. And so Jesus was, often much more critical of them than he was of the sinners, because the sinners were much quicker to repent. And the Pharisees just, they were of the opinion that, we're doing everything right, we're doing everything good, there's nothing wrong, we're walking around without sin, when in fact that's far from the truth. So here's another example, Matthew 23:25 through 28, where Jesus says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside they are full of robbery and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and of the dish, so that the outside of it may become clean also. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside they are full of dead men's bones and are in all uncleanness. So you too outwardly appear righteous to men, but inwardly you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." So, we see his judgment in that area. Now, I mentioned towards the sinners, this is from John 8:1 through 11. Here's his response to someone who was caught in the act of adultery. "Early in the morning he came again into the temple, and all the people were coming to him. And he sat down and began to teach them. The scribes and the Pharisees brought a woman caught in adultery, and having set her in the center of the court, they said to him, 'Teacher, this woman has been caught in adultery in the very act. Now in the law Moses commanded us to stone such women. What then do you say?'" Now, what's interesting is they didn't bring the man, who, and it's clear the woman was caught in the act of adultery. Yet what they were trying to do here is they were trying to set up Jesus, or they were trying to trap him. If he either disagreed with the law, then they would say, you're unrighteous because you will not uphold Moses' law in this matter. And if he agreed we should stone the woman, then, again, he would have fallen out of favor among many people to see his, heartlessness in this matter, that, she should be stoned to death. So it's interesting, his response to this. They were saying this, testing him, so that they might have grounds for accusing him. But Jesus stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground. But when they persisted in asking him, he straightened up and said to them, "He who is without sin among you, let him be the first to throw a stone at her." Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. When they heard it, they began to go out one by one, beginning with the older ones, and he was left alone, and the woman where she was, in the center of the court. Straightening up, Jesus said to her, "Woman, where are they? Did no one condemn you?" She said, "No one, Lord." And Jesus said, "I do not condemn you either. Go, from now on sin no more." So what's interesting is he didn't say, "Oh, don't worry about it, just, you're fine, go away." He said, "Go and sin no more." Again, there's a judgment there, but by the law of Moses, some people, by the way, have this theory, and I think it might be true, that when Jesus was writing in the sand, he was actually writing the sins of the men that were holding the stones ready to stone her. And so that would make sense why they were going away one at a time, because they were like, "Oh, I guess I can't throw that stone either." And interestingly, the only one who was righteous enough that could, but under the law of Moses, stone her to death was Jesus, because he was without sin. Yet he chose not to. He chose to forgive her. So it shows both Jesus' compassion, but it also shows the kind of the way that we should judge others. Is we should judge based on God's righteousness, but we should be much more concerned about judging ourselves than judging those people around us. So to help illustrate that, there's a really interesting example in Dr. Stephen Covey's book. His fifth habit is seek first to understand, then to be understood. And he talks in the book about this concept of a paradigm shift. And he illustrates that with this example, a fictional example where everyone is, imagine a morning where everyone's on a subway, and it's a nice quiet morning. People are reading their books. There's, no noise. And then suddenly at the next stop, a man gets on board and his two children are screaming and fighting with each other. And he seems to just be ignoring the situation and just sits down and doesn't do anything about it. Now, the judgment that happens amongst most of the people on the subway at that time is, wow, what a disruption to the peace, and, why is this man not controlling his children better? And, maybe getting a little angry at him. One person approaches and says, "Sir, can you please try to control your children a little better?" And then the man, suddenly becoming aware of what's going on around him, says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I suppose you're right. We're going home from the hospital where their mother has just passed away." And so, when we hear that type of a story, we go from a position of judgment to more a position of sympathy for the man. And he describes this as a paradigm shift that we all go through. So the important thing to understand is, regardless of what all of our beliefs are, or regardless of what seems to be going on around us, oftentimes we don't really know what people are thinking. We don't really know what's going on in their life right now. And so often the recommendation I always say is give people the benefit of the doubt and get to know people well enough that, before you can even give advice to someone. A good example of that was, I talked about how when I was going through depression, most of my friends were all very sympathetic to me. And I had one friend, Ron Erickson, who, when I explained to him, why I was skipping so much school and asked him, so you understand, what I'm going through, he, kind of had that tough love attitude and said, no, I don't understand, and Tom, you've got so much going on in your life, why are you doing this to yourself? And that was exactly what I needed to hear at that time. And so, that was a judgment on his part, but, we had a relationship already, we already had a friendship, and so, there was enough trust built up with that, where, in my emotional bank account, he could, he's deposited so much and done so much for me in our friendship that's built up that, he could risk taking that small withdrawal in order to give me a bit of advice to help me further. And I appreciate that so much, that he would, make that judgment in order to help me. So that's, I hope that helps explain, kind of when it's appropriate and when it's not. But in general, we need to just not make those snap judgments, and we need to give people the benefit of the doubt, and we need to be more concerned about looking in the mirror first whenever we make judgments about whatever circumstance or whatever belief someone might have. So for that, thanks again once more to Stephen Covey.